As a Democratic primary voters go to the polls tomorrow, the contest has now become a two-man race between former Vice President Joe Biden and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Both candidates support abortion. Here now to help us take a look from a Catholic perspective at where things stand is Robert George McCormick, Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. Robbie, welcome back to the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy. It's good to be back on with you.
Well, a lot has changed since the last time we talked. We've seen several of the Democratic candidates for president drop out of this race, leaving Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and Tulsi Gabbard still in. But we're still looking at candidates who've all expressed views that are pro-abortion. How significant do you think that is for pro-life Democrats?
Well, it's going to be very significant, and pro-life Democrats have already made their voices heard on that. They feel very much excluded from the party. The party's previous position, certainly not adequate from my point of view, but nevertheless not as extreme as where they are now, was that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. At least there was an acknowledgement that the killing of unborn babies was an undesirable thing. That was President Clinton's position. That was the position of the mainstream of the party. It's now moved far beyond that, and with the sole exception of Tulsi Gabbard, who at least is open to the possibility of protecting children in the third trimester of pregnancy and gestation, the candidates have simply abandoned the unborn. And I think for pro-life Democrats, of whom there are millions, by the way, there are millions of Democrats who believe in the sanctity of all human life and the protection of all human beings, all members of the human family. For them, this is a tragedy. And you also, of course, see that not only has the party and its candidates adopted a very extreme position, they have made clear that there is no room in the party, as far as they are concerned, for people who dissent from this new orthodoxy. So you find people like Charlie Camosy, a straightforward, progressive Democrat professor who has long been a stalwart of his party and of the progressive movement, now abandoning it and saying, I can no longer stay. And he's far from alone. You probably saw the episode in which Kristen Day challenged Pete Buttigieg on the issue and got a very, very unsatisfactory response from that candidate. So I think the Democrats are at very grave risk, more than grave risk, of losing a large element of the constituency who would like to vote for them. They don't like President Trump. There's a lot about President Trump that they dislike, character issues, immigration issues, things like that. But they feel that they've been abandoned by the Democrats. This is a terrible mistake on the part of the Democratic Party.
Well, in our EWTN News Real Clear Opinion Research poll, Joe Biden had a narrow lead over Bernie Sanders with Catholic voters. What do you think is Bernie Sanders' appeal to Catholics, especially young Catholics?
Well, here Catholics are not distinctive at all. In fact, in politics generally, if you just count people who check the boxes as Catholic, they pretty much are reflective of the overall population. And Sanders does much better with young people than he does with middle-aged people and older people. On the Democratic side, Biden does better with middle-aged people and with older people. Interestingly, Biden does much better with African Americans as well. And of course, that's an extremely important constituency of the Democratic Party. By the way, that's also a pro-life constituency. Of the millions of pro-life Democrats who are out there, a very substantial percentage are what are called Fannie Hamer Democrats. That is African-American pro-life Democrats who are committed to the pro-life cause precisely because of Dr. Martin Luther King's vision of the brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God, that we are all brothers and sisters made in the very image and likeness of the divine creator and ruler of the universe. Biden so far in the primaries has held a lot of African-American voters, and that's how he has fended off the challenge from Sanders. But it's going to be tough for him because of that issue in the general.
Yeah, we don't have much time left, Robbie, but I do want to get to this question. Joe Biden's been stressing that he's Catholic. How do you think his voting record on key issues for Catholics, how do you think that's going to come into play in this race as it continues?
Well, it will be an issue certainly for pro-life Catholics, but not just Catholics. It's going to be an issue for pro-life people across the agenda, pro-life evangelicals, pro-life observant Jews, pro-life Muslims. This is not a Catholic issue. It's a human rights issue. It's a human life issue. Catholics tend to be divided on it the way people in other religions do, but there is a very substantial portion, the most faithful Catholics, the most faithful Protestants, most faithful and observant Jews and Muslims who are on the pro-life side of this. Now, for many of them, Trump is a real problem, a big problem for obvious reasons. They would prefer to vote for a Democrat, but if Biden makes it impossible for them to support him, that will be the margin of victory, I'm afraid, for Trump.
Well, Robbie, thank you so much again for your insight. Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tracy.